Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sebastian Gruber. I work with the NYUAD Art Gallery as the Community Engagement and Marketing Officer. And I'm really excited to welcome you to tonight's talk, The Histories We Create, with David Wrisley and Maryam Al Hamra. The talk is actually our very first talk in our public program series called Navigating Digital Identities, alongside our virtual exhibition that is named Not In, Off, Along, or Relating to a Line. And I'm really pleased to welcome you all today. These are shorter sessions, so we're looking at around 45 minutes, maybe to an hour. What you can expect is hearing from Mariam and from David for the first 20 minutes to 30 minutes. They will enter into a conversation about the histories we create and different digital narratives and ways of storytelling in the digital space. And then afterwards, we'll have a moment to hear your voices, to hear your thoughts and questions for about another 15 minutes. So in the beginning part, I would highly encourage you to please use the chat. If you have any thoughts, comments you want to throw into the conversation, please do that there. And then I will kind of lead us through. I'll allow you to unmute yourselves after, let's say, the first half hour, so that you can then join in with your voices if you feel comfortable to do so. If not, please feel free to use the chat. I will make sure to read out any questions that you might have to our speakers tonight. Otherwise, just other logistical considerations. We are recording the talk for our YouTube channel to publish the recording later. So if you don't wish to be seen in the YouTube recording, just turn off your camera. You can still participate, or let us know afterwards by emailing us. I'll keep admitting people into the room. And then otherwise, I do want to thank our media partners for helping us get the word out there for our events, and their Abu Dhabi World, The National, Yalla Magazine, Al-Ittihad, and those are them. So welcome again, thank you so much. And I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to Maryam Al Hamra, who will begin.
Hello, everyone. I want to start by thanking the NYU Gallery for inviting me to be part of this show, and also David to being part of this conversation. I'm going to share the screen now. Let me know if this is okay, if you can see. Okay, perfect. So for everyone that doesn't know me, my name is Maryam Al Hamra. I am the director and head researcher of AlHamra National Museum. Our work is specifically about sort of showcasing the AlHamra civilization to the world, as it's sort of an undiscovered civilization. The museum's goal, or some of the goals currently, are to have multiple collaborations with different organizations around the world to help with the showcase of the civilization. And this leads us to the current show here at NYU. Our first showcase that we had in the UAE was actually in Art Dubai a couple of years ago. And that's when we sort of showcased a couple of things about Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam VI. And with this show, we wanted to showcase more of the queens that have existed in the civilization and have been very influential in the history of AlHamra. So when you enter sort of the show itself, the first queen that you see is Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam II. Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam II basically was not the first Mariam to roam Earth. She was the daughter of the first Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam the first, who came actually from the stars. Queen Mariam II was the queen that birthed the first civilization of AlHamra people on Earth. She sort of set the footprint for what the civilization was and their roles on this planet. The second queen that we have here is Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam the Third. Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam III helped with expanding of the civilization. She was actually quite influential, not just within the civilization itself, within the AlHamra itself, but also around the world. A lot of people don't know this, but she was actually great friends with Homer. She was also briefly mentioned in the Iliad and the Odyssey. She also had great connections with the Egyptian civilization and the Babylonian Empire. This is why we refer to her as the Gold Queen, because she was able to have great diplomatic relationships with all of these very important civilizations during this period of time during her reign. After that, we go into Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam the Fourth. Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam the Fourth is kind of known for her stubbornness and short temper. She was the warrior out of all the queens that have ruled the civilization. And during her reign, the civilization had a very important discovery, which is the ruby gems that helped fuel their weaponry. So she was also able to take control of the majority of the planet because of the power that she had gained. Her reign ended around 4,900 ARM, which is, I think it's around, I need to check what is it in human years. I believe it's around maybe 1,400 AD. Yes, 1,400 AD. And then we go into the fifth, who is Her Royal Highness Queen Fifth. She is known as the Winged Queen. So she was the first one to be born with wings. And a fun fact, Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam the First, who came from space, actually had wings. So she was sort of the manifestation of the first queen when she came, the first queen Mariam. And she was sort of looked at as the sort of a hopeful, maybe the positive light, especially after coming after Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam the Fourth, who was more of a strong, maybe even a tyrant type of a figure. And then the last queen that is very close to my heart is actually Queen Mariam the Sixth, or the Fifth, sorry. And she's actually my grandmother, who passed away in 2011 in Venice, Italy. We were on a trip to Venice, my cousins and I, with my grandmother, and she was shot actually in Venice, and that's how we lost her. And actually, her passing was the reason why I felt the need to go back into our history books and try to showcase the civilization to people around the world. So yeah, those are the five queens that we are showcasing at the NYUAD.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mariam, for that overview. Do you have anything else to add, or should we hand over the virtual mic to David?
I think I'm good. I have a couple of points to go over later on, but I think I'm good.
Great. Then we'll hand over the virtual mic to David.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is David Wrisley. I teach digital humanities at NYUAD. My basic research field, if you would be the intersections of technology with the arts and humanities, in particular with historical humanities. And so I lead some projects at NYU that have to do with AI and machine learning and information archives from the past, particularly those of pre-modern societies. And also a project called Open Gulf about doing a digital history of the Gulf region. So I'd like also to thank the NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery for the opportunity and the invitation to speak tonight and to be in conversation with Mariam and with the public. It's really a great honor. My thanks to Maya and to Heather for that invitation. So before we go to that conversation, I'd like to offer my thoughts as a digital humanist looking at these materials and looking and walking through, if you like, this exhibition of AlHamra civilization that Mariam has curated for us. So if you haven't had the opportunity to see the exhibition, right, the exhibition is a virtual one. It's kind of, if you like, it's an exhibition within an exhibition, right? It's actually hosted, from what I can tell, by Cupix, which is a cloud-based platform as service that allows for 3D photography to be put together into a virtual tour. So what that means is it's the kind of software that, let's say, if you were a real estate developer, a property manager, or a museum director in a pandemic mode, you might use that to have people be able to peer into spaces that they don't actually have access to, that they can't go into. So I'm not going to walk you through the virtual tour because I think Miriam's already done that for you. I would just say that one of the interesting things that we miss is that when you first come from the app-based virtual exhibition, you're actually standing in a space which has that kind of characteristic feeling of the NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery, with those beige hardwood floors and those white exhibition walls. And then inside of the exhibition is that painted intense red color that we saw behind the statues. I tried to match it. It looked to me a little bit like Pantone 2035C, but I'm not exactly sure what color that Hamra is inside. So when I spent time in the virtual exhibition, something else began to sink in, though, for me. I began to reflect on how Miriam's work is a kind of identity creation, right? I think that matches the way that it matches up with the general themes of the show, and in particular, displaying and narrating what she calls these artifacts from this ancient AlHamra civilization. And I was experiencing how she builds that history or creates that history, if we go back to the title of the discussion tonight. And that really began to draw my attention back to our own complicity with the digital, right? And sort of forcing me to think about how my own lives are kind of over-mediated by devices and platforms in which I am also curating my own existence. So that was a really interesting reflective moment for me. In my eye, Miriam's work sits at the intersection of a number of past, present, and future forms of speculative thinking. Now, if you're aware of that notion of speculative thinking, it's connected to the kind of design thinking and, if you like, speculative fiction acts that we find, one finds really right throughout history, but that some have actually argued develop in tandem with digital society, right? So her curatorial work makes claims about recuperating these untold stories, the untold stories in particular, interestingly, of women in a matrilineal civilization through artifacts. And so then it enacts those stories in this VR, or this virtual reality environment. It's kind of a virtual museum reality. And as a lot of other speculative fiction does, it actually populates the landscape. It's a world-making exercise. It populates the landscape with figures that have been found, people, places, timelines, and it does so by digging into the past. And I think that's the most interesting part of it for me, is it's not a forward-looking speculative fiction, it's a kind of reverse speculative fiction, a past-looking speculative fiction. So we might even compare, I think, Miriam's work with some of the speculative literary fiction that we've seen in the MENA region, a lot of which you've seen in the MENA region recently. But whereas that, coming from places like Egypt and Iraq, is very dystopian, what I think is we're looking at here is a different kind of fiction. It's like if you think just about the kind of the prosperous and sort of prosperous society that the UAE is, right, and the kind of reigning optimism that one finds, it's not a dystopian look back at the past. It's actually the opposite of that. So for me, Miriam's work is a kind of a creative, vibrant space for exploring alternative pasts, thinking about post-national futures, even those which, as we heard, extend beyond the confines of our own planet. So I'm not sure that anybody's made this comparison yet between Mariam, but we might even see in her exhibition within an exhibition a kind of a precursor of this April's naming of another first Emirati landmark, and that's the first female astronaut in the UAE. So in conclusion, what I just would like to suggest is that what we see in her curatorial work displayed in this NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery show is what I would call a kind of born digital retro-speculative optimism. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. There's so much in there. I can't wait for you and Mariam to get to talk to each other. So we're gonna move into that portion. I will allow for the two of you to unmute yourselves, and we'll just start our conversation between the two of you, and then in around 10 to 12 minutes, we'll bring in our audience. For the audience, if you have any questions, any comments you want to that you want to jump into the conversation with, please feel free to use the chat, and then I'll give you another reminder that you can join the conversation in about 10 minutes. So David, Mariam, take it away.
Hi, David.
Hi, Mariam. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I'm so happy that we're able to talk about your work today. And I just was really, I have like, as I was thinking about it, I mean, you heard from my thoughts. I had just a million questions, like a million ideas that were sort of coming to my mind. I really enjoyed experiencing your work. So thank you, first of all, for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for actually everything that you just said. It just feels so on point. Yeah, I can't wait to get in.
Great. So I wanted to start with, I was listening to an interview that you did for the National. There was like a podcast, I think, that was about the larger exhibition in which your exhibition sits. And one of the things that you said there that was really interesting to me is you talked about how members of the AlHamra civilization they're among us, right? Even though we don't even see them, but they're here amongst us. They kind of live amongst us. And that they choose when we can actually get to see them. Did I understand you correctly?
Yes, that is correct.
When and why does that happen?
It just depends. It's a safety thing, to be honest. My people have suffered a lot through history, especially in the last sort of phase of the civilization. And part of it is that there is this sort of, I don't even want to name the person, but there is a very sort of a very sort of evil figure that is sort of trying to find us and fully destroy our civilization. So that's kind of why it's a safety thing. Yeah.
Okay, so it's I get that. That makes sense to me now. I was wondering why it is that they sort of pop, but when they do come, they must have some interesting. Do they have like news for humankind, or do they pass on something? Do they choose people that they speak to?
Yes. So yes, we do. We do have contact to the human side. We're continuously going in and out between the two places. We exist in all of these different areas in the world. Not only this, but AlHamra people also are integrated in different, like different sort of like different types of jobs and careers.
Yeah,
some
right.
of our people, some of our people are in medicine. Some are actually in like transport and hospitality. So we're kind of integrated within society, but we show our true form when we feel safe. Yeah.
Fascinating. So one of the things that struck me when I was in the virtual exhibition is that on the Arabic side, the bilingual exhibition didn't seem like the Arabic was any different from the English, but on the Arabic side, there was one difference, and there was a logo on top of the Arabic side, and that was for the museum where you're head researcher. Is the logo important? I mean, is there some kind of symbolism in the logo? I was just curious because it had kind of a red circle and then there were almost like dots on it or something like that.
Yes. If you look closely at the logo, it's actually resembles a mulberry berry. So the berry itself. So the berry holds great spiritual relationship to the Al Hamra people, and that's why the logo was designed after the berry itself.
Super. How interesting. Like all these details that I wish that in some ways that I had that kind of context when I came to your exhibition. Thank you so much. So can you tell us a little bit more about the museum? Like what's the museum like? I mean, what kind of work do you do there as head researcher?
Yes, of course. So the museum has been around long, like for thousands of years. My relationship with the museum started after 2011. I started with doing an internship there first. The museum currently holds around, just need to find the number, three 38,000 objects from prehistory to the current times, all relating to Al-Hamra civilization. And a lot of these artifacts sort of belong to three main eras of Al-Hamra civilization, and these are the Renaissance era, the Golden era, and the Ruby period. And actually, I was talking about this a bit earlier, but we've had a recent discovery of a number of artifacts that we found in the ocean. So we've had some divers go in today. Actually, I started my morning with that, trying to retrieve these artifacts from the bottom of the ocean.
So this museum, that's a pretty big museum, and that's a really big collection. 38,000
Yes.
objects is a big collection. That means that you can't have very many things showing at one time in a particular place. Am I right?
That's true.
Okay. So how did you, so your choice, what I understood is your choice for this particular, because of this particular exhibition within an exhibition, right? You chose what you really wanted to do was to feature the queens. Those statues are really astonishing. Of each of them. And so you did a really great job in your presentation, sort of explaining what the different symbolism is and all that. What was the context in which those things emerged? Because they're almost like monumental, statuesque figures. Were they on like fortresses or castles or palaces, or where were they from? Do you know anything about them?
It's very different for each of the statues. The three main ones, which is Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam II, III, and IV, were in great condition. The other two, the museum itself kind of took ownership in constructing the sculptures based on the written history. Because the last two queens have gone missing and we don't have proper records of them. We don't, so up until the passing of my grandmother, it was believed that Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam the Sixth, who is my grandmother, was basically dead. And that's sort of the connection that we started to draw back. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it's really interesting because it what you just said kind of bounces off of some of what my reflections were, right? Is that there's in the gesture and your curation is this kind of recuperation and preparing things. It's a curation which is for right now, but also for the future. So you're going back into records and kind of reenacting or recreating things from the past. So some of that's a kind of a virtualization, right?
Yes, definitely.
Cool. So I have a question about lockdown and about pandemic and what pandemic has done to digital. Because this exhibition, in which your exhibition sits, was conceived of in lockdown mode, right? It was kind of like we wanted to do what we couldn't do or what we weren't going to do in regular times, right? We were looking for things that were kind of unique or things that we could do in digital space, maybe that we can't do in regular space. And so I'm curious, what do you think when we move out of lockdown? What's going to happen to AlHamra art?
So that's a very good question, because this is actually how this collaboration started. We had sort of a conversation because our plans this year for AlHamra Museum was actually to open up the doors to the world in order to, to come and see the museum itself. But because of the pandemic, these plans sort of shifted, and that's sort of was the beginning of a conversation that we've had with NYU Gallery, and maybe possibly having a virtual show with them to sort of showcase the queens before we open up the doors of the museum. So the goals in the next, hopefully when the pandemic is over, is to open up the museum for everyone to come and visit it and learn more about our civilization.
Huh. Well, great. That would be amazing if we'd be able to visit it. Is it like, can you tell us a little bit about the museum? Like, what does it look like? How big is it?
So the museum is actually located in an old fortress that was built by Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam II. It had many sort of renovations through history. At one point, it was the home for the last queens, and it extended with a large garden around it. So there's a lot of different elements that the museum has, but it's historically came from Her Royal Highness Queen Mariam II. She's built it first.
So is it like possible for a normal human being like myself to visit that museum? Is that like or do I have to do something special to get there? Or because you're talking about this civilization is pretty extraordinary. So
no, you'll be able to come in. Don't worry.
Great. Awesome. So I guess I don't want to monopolize. I have many more questions. I can keep going for a long time. But I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I think maybe, Sebastian, our idea was to maybe open it up to the community. Thank you, Mariam, for your thoughtful responses.
Thank you, David, for your questions, honestly.
Thank you both. And yes, like David said, now would be a great time to open it up to anyone in the audience. So you should be able to unmute yourselves if you want to jump in with any questions, with any thoughts or comments, anything that David has said as well. And while you're mulling that over, I'm gonna just start with the question that Nora posted in the chat to Mariam. And this is, did you get involved in the museum in 2011 after the passing of your grandmother? How did that event affect you? And was there a continuity that you wanted to achieve or ensure?
Definitely. I think my grandma's passing definitely pushed me to learn more about our people. And the thing that led me to the museum was actually her jewelry. My grandma owned a lot of rubies. And then through learning about the powers of the ruby, that started my internship with the museum. I wanted to discover or learn more about the powers of the ruby. Continuity. I think my cousins are really doing a great job at expanding and sort of plotting different trees around the world to continue the 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 name of AlHamra in different parts of the world, and I hope I am too through my work with the museum.
Amazing, thank you. Maya, you unmuted yourself, then maybe Heather.
Yeah, Jumeri also, it was through Jumeri in his collaboration with Mariam, actually, that I started to learn about the civilization. Jumeri says, you mentioned that one of the queens is still missing. Do you know where she is?
We don't know where she is right now. She is the winged queen. She sort of went in hiding once the civilization fell, and we're still waiting or looking for her. So if anyone knows any sort of information about her, please get in touch with us. We'd be, we're really looking hard to find her.
I'd also just like to thank you for sort of taking the risk to partner with us to put this this part of the reality that we can't see into a visible space. And one of the wonderful things about exhibition making is that it makes visible the invisible, whether that's historically, culturally, or in terms of our internal worlds, or in this case, the AlHamra civilization. So it was really such an honor to be able to be the first institution on the human side to show the work of the AlHamra people. Looks like there's other questions popping up here.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you, Heather, for having me, honestly. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I hope that we continue this relationship moving forward.
Yeah, and Nora asks, what would finding this other queen mean? What would be the impact? And I would add to that, like, what are the signs that we should be looking for that we might have found her?
Okay. This is quite easy. All of the AlHamra people kind of look like me. So if you find someone that kind of looks like me, then there's a good chance that they belong to AlHamra. The second clue is that she might have wings. So winged and looks like me. What does that mean? We don't know. We hope that she will be able to restore the power of AlHamra civilization back, but we really don't know what will happen when she comes back.
And just to confirm, her name will be Mariam. Mariam.
Her name will definitely be Mariam. Yes.
Okay. Excellent show. So interesting. From
Heather has her hand up, so I'll.
Oh, sorry.
I'll Heather, ask your question.
Far too polite.
No problem. Yeah, I was just wondering how you feel about the digital exhibition. We kind of touched that a little bit earlier, but I wonder how, if you feel like it conveys the objects in the way that you hoped that it would, how the space feels, these kinds of things.
Yes. It's incredible. Your team did an incredible job in translating the sculptures that we brought forward to the digital platform. It's been really an incredible working relationship, and it's exactly what we envisioned it to be when this collaboration started. So yeah, we're very happy, very happy here at the
Lee has a question about translation. If you want to unmute yourself, Lee, please go ahead. I'm not sure if it's
okay.
Easy to...
Hi, everybody. And hi, Mariam. Thank you so much. And hi, David. Thanks for this conversation. It's so interesting to me. I have a question about translation of form. You said something about how your people take on different occupations in this human realm. And I was wondering about energy, like if your people have if they're able to be fluid in form, is like, can you talk a little bit about the energy consumption it takes to be human? Is it something that, is that the most liberating form for your people?
Is human the most liberating form?
Yeah.
Okay. Not really. It's actually quite restricting, to be honest. Yeah, it's really restricting, and I think the big part of it is that our civilization is female by nature, and when you turn human, you sort of, I don't know, I feel a disconnect to my female goddesses. And that's a big part of it, why I feel maybe there's a bit of a heaviness when we do get into the human.
Okay.
Also, side note, huge fan of your work, Lee.
Oh, same here. I think you're fascinating. And then I have a question for David about the digital humanities and world building. When I think about AI, I think about the way that it's been translated for utility, and it's based on, very specific types of intelligence. And so do you feel that machine learning and AI has a place in world building? And if you do, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I mean, certainly the research that I've done has in machine learning and AI has been essentially where we've taken kind of deep human content knowledge, right, and then applied algorithms to it to use it as a kind of a ground truth, if you like, right, for training models that then produce more of what we want, right? And of course, there are problems with that kind of AI because that's what reproduces racism, and that's what reproduces discrimination, that's what reproduces in the world all kinds of prejudices, where we take the majority voices in society and we push them forward. But your question about AI for speculative domains is a really interesting one, and I think there's no doubt a strong tradition of that, just thematically coming from science fiction, right? Of sort of intelligences that are more than human. But I think even if we just think about, let's say, what we know how to do right now with machine learning and AI, there's a whole really interesting field of AI and art, right? Where we're looking at not only the creation of new patterns based on what we are able to produce already. We have really interesting stuff on like the generative adversarial networks, the GANs, that allow us to kind of move between forms that we have seen, that allow us to slide between figural representations and even generate new ones. So certainly there's some work to be done there about, I mean, we could even take, for example, representations from AlHamra civilization, like the queens that we have on display. And we probably don't have enough to create a GAN out of those, but we could combine them together with, say, the other civilizations that Mariam says that the AlHamra civilization was in touch with, and even imagine interstitial representations, right? That or new ways of imagining intercivilizational depiction. So I think that's an excellent question. I personally myself don't do that, but I am very interested in thinking about that as a concept. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, interstitial is a great word. I appreciate that in creating imagery just from hearing you all talk. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question too, if there's a chance.
Please go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask Mariam if, there have been two words kind of bouncing around a little bit, the word nation and word female, which I actually want to ask about more feminist. So if there's a connotation in Hamra civilization that gives a meaning that makes sense to you in your context to these two words, feminist and nation, I would like to know your thoughts about this.
I mean, our civilization has been built by females, so we believe in the female power. The goddesses we worship are all feminine, so it's very, very important to us. I'm sort of lost with the question, actually.
I guess I meant, sorry, you've seen on Earth, there's a lot of feminist struggles and
Yes.
assertiveness. Time has come and it's going on, and I was wondering if this can be interspecies extended to an alliance with a Hamra civilization, or if there's something that can go beyond. If it's something that it's felt across the two civilizations or not.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I was talking about when I was answering Lee's question about changing form, like there is the struggle of maybe losing the power that we have when we are in Al-Hamra, we come to the human side. And we are all feminists in Al-Hamra, so yeah, we believe in the
You cut out for just a second there, but I find myself wondering, if it's a matrilineal or matriarchal culture, what does feminism mean when you're not in the patriarchy?
Yeah.
Can we ask this question, or will we be up all night?
That's where
It's
I was
very
going.
tough to
Thank you,
answer,
Maya,
you
for
know.
pushing forward.
I'm not giving up on that one. Yeah.
It's a very big question. Yes, like, no, the question has so many layers because we are not used to it in our part of the world. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's stuff.
Well,
I wouldn't know where to start.
I wonder if the word, I'm curious if the sort of identification of yourself and your culture as a feminist one came about by contact with one that is not feminist, right? So sometimes you don't recognize, you don't name your identity until you're in a context in which you're the other. Yeah. Sort of by context. Somebody asked, Khalid, what does feminism mean in a matriarchal? Oh, okay. Same thing. Okay, got it.
I am curious though, because the second part of Francesca's question was what does nation mean in the context of the AlHamra civilization? So Mariam, if you want to address that part as well, that would be, I'm curious about that.
It's home. It's weird to say, but my tribe and my people are they give me a sense of peace. So a nation is belonging, it's home. Yeah.
And there's another question in the chat from Bana Katan about, she says, I'm curious about the material of the sculptures. Are they made of stone, marble, or an otherworldly material?
They are marble, yes.
So were you harvesting marble from our dimension, or do you have marble in your dimension?
We do have marble in our dimension. Yes.
Okay. Do you share the same marble, or is it different marble?
It's quite the same. It's quite the same. The only difference is historically your statues, I believe, get painted, but ours, we never paint them.
Why is that?
We believe in materials and the sort of, we like materials to stay true to form because we've been integrated with nature for so long that we believe we want to respect the materials and everything around us. That's the reason why.
And then another question, anyone who wants to turn on their microphones also can just jump in, but we're happy to read the questions. Is this civilization only based on a genetic link, or can anyone join or travel to it?
It is based on a genetic link. You can definitely travel once COVID is over. We will definitely invite everyone to the civilization, to AlHamra. But currently, there's travel restrictions to AlHamra.
I want to ask one more thing that just comes to mind about that idea of travel restrictions, because it's really interesting that being only of human form, I think about isolation and travel restrictions as something that maybe I want to escape, right? I sort of feel, and I think a lot of people around me, have been thrust into these virtual spaces for such a long time that we just feel like we really need to return to our lives. We need to be out in have a different set. We are social beings, in other words, right? We are social humans and we need that aspect. And what we're getting right now has been too long. It's been too hard for people. I'm wondering, for somebody who kind of moves between forms and who thinks about, who has different instantiations, as you were talking about, Mariam, do you think that AlHamra civilization has something to say to people about the desire to run back to life?
Me, I think we want to go back to what we were, our natural selves. And it sort of does parallel in a strange way to wanting to let go of this pandemic and go back to normal. Um, but I do see the sort of struggle or the need to go back to pure truth. Yeah.
Thank you, Mariam.
There's something that, oh, sorry. Are we
No,
out
go
of
ahead.
time?
Go ahead, Lee. No, go ahead. We
There's
can
something
give it maybe 3 more questions.
so relatable about what you're saying about your name and your people and the civilization, and the fact that, just going back a few minutes, you said that we would recognize anyone who was lost from the civilization because they looked like you. And I started, and in conjunction with this question from David, it's like I can appreciate the interstitial kind of forms that, and the fluidity that, like, some of these technologies sort of give us, but at the same time, there's genes that is so that that supplies some sort of connectivity that nothing else does. Like the fact that when you said that, I thought about my tribe, my family, and the fact that we all look like one person in our family, and you always know who a Blaylock is. As problematic as our last names are, if you're African American, like, you always know who that kid is because they look just like someone in the family, and that to me is a reason to appreciate this, like, human form, just like dropping back into it, just so you aren't floating around in this holographic world. You're like actually connected by these genes that say, I belong to your tribe, And so I don't know, there's something about that that's so poetic and relatable, even in a digital platform. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Lee. Does anyone else have any other questions, comments, or thoughts? Feel free to put them in the chat now. Unmute yourselves, ask those questions. If not, I do have one for David that will be somewhat fumbly and stumbly. But you, since you've looked at Mariam's work so extensively now at this point, and with this conversation, what are the things that you are drawing in terms of the history and the story that she is telling about the civilization, what she's bringing forth that we can relate or bring into telling our stories, or looking at the way in which we have told stories, or we're continuing to tell our stories through digital media? Do you see anything that has changed, how your perspective on that has changed? Anything that you would say, this is a different way to look at it, or I've learned something that I would want to take into the world or into my practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right. I mean, my remarks starting was really talking about her work and not necessarily thinking about how her work flows back into mine. Right. I think that's what you're getting at. Right. I guess, I mean, for me, one of the interesting things about the particular work that I've done, and so in this field for, let's say, 10 years now, is how much it's changing all the time. We have this kind of, one of the refrains that we've heard, and I think false refrains, by the way, that we've heard during the pandemic, is that somehow things are changing for good, or things are changing for whatever. And I actually think that we've been in sort of moments of lots of change for a long time. And I've seen lots and lots and lots of media change in the small amount of life that I've lived. And certainly in the time that I've been a practitioner in this, in an academic and professional space. So I guess I'm inspired by the curatorial work that Mariam is doing, and I'm inspired by the willingness to sort of continually reinsert discovery into new form. I don't know if that makes sense, but sort of wherever the form is kind of shifting, in some ways we have to follow that. And the more we want to have audiences which are far away, right, and not just local, the more that we have to consider what that shifting spectrum is, right, of that media spectrum is. So I guess that's where I'm inspired by her work, to take these, what are really no doubt extraordinarily heavy marble statues, right, and to kind of mount them in a gallery and to transform that into this virtual tour and to do all those things. So and for the moment, right, I mean, I think this is one of the other things that I am increasingly seeing, is that from just the last year's experience, that kind of being ready to adapt your work and your creative practice to the moment in which, the moment in which people are living right now, that's one of my big takeaways this year. And I think Mariam has definitely also shown that in her work. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for answering it so wonderfully. Anyway, I'm going to give around 15 seconds for anyone else to ask any questions that they might have. From Amna to David, have you seen a change in the interested audiences since the pandemic?
Right. That's a great question, Amna. I mean, I've been probably more than ever in my entire life sort of thrust into the spotlight with Zoom, or the Zoom light, whatever you want to call it, the Teams light, or whatever these platforms that we're all looking at. I mean, I really am talking now in conferences where instead of having maybe 30 people in the room, or maybe a keynote in which you give at a conference and there are 50 people in the room, I am now speaking to audiences of 100 or 200 or more. And so I'm not 100% sure that that's exactly a change in interested audience, but it's certainly a change in accessibility to audiences, right? Like, people can be a part of the experiences and the sharing of thoughts, that is speaking and public speaking. And I would think that that would also be true for Heather and Maya, right? I mean, the show this particular year was able to travel, per se, or is able to move in the world, or it was accessible in the world in a way that probably a show at the NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery wasn't in previous years. I don't know, Maya, you can help me. Maybe you know something about stats or about who's coming and who's using it. But I would say definitely there has been a definite big change in audience. Yeah, thanks for the question on that.
Audience is bigger, or it's as big or bigger, which is surprising to me, but it's far more dispersed across the globe. But then I wonder, there's this sense of like, there's the volume of audience, but the actual sort of connection to that audience is so much more fragile. You know, when somebody comes into the gallery and I give a tour, that leads to a very sort of concrete feeling connection around the art. Whereas, except in moments like this, people are having interactions with the artwork in this very individual way. I think very much like we're individually interacting with our computers, even when there are multiple people on the screen. The quality of the audience is very different. But there is that, yeah, there's this sense that you're somehow both more visible and less seen. If that makes any sense. I'm also thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about how Mariam's work sort of has an opportunity to be seen in a world in which everything is being seen virtually, right? And that this is kind of this perfect moment for something to become visible when there's no risk to the people of the AlHamra civilization, because they can appear virtually on the other side of a screen, so they can't be hurt in the same way. So there's this layer of protection that's provided even as we're more exposed through digital connections. I'm sort of free associating here, so I hope that was coherent.
Yeah, there's definitely like there's the issue of fragility, there's that issue of intimacy, there's protection, there's the accessibility. There's all kinds of trade-offs in this moment. And what I would also say, I guess, is that part of the interaction question is also about providing a different kind of experience for people, right? Providing an experience which matches maybe the fragile state that of the communication, right? Maybe getting to the point more quickly, or maybe having shorter events like this one that Sebastian was talking about. Taking care of also of those wider audiences in the ways that we communicate and speak publicly.
Great, and with David's note on the shortness of the events, I want to just bring it back to one last question from Amna, which you already started to address a little bit, David, but in case you want to add anything, and our last question for tonight. Following on from this, are there any additional challenges you foresee in sharing these stories, and how can we mitigate these? And maybe also hearing from Mariam again, in terms of her curatorial practice and research, on her take on that question would be amazing. So David, if you want to start, and then Mariam.
Sure. So I confront this every day when I teach. Like, I wonder, how has a class been naturalized as a 75-minute experience? Right? Like, who decided in the world that 75 minutes is what a class should be? Because actually for the last year, I've been teaching in snippets and teaching in a combination of smaller units, some pre-recorded sessions, some recorded live sessions. So, a mixing, in other words. So it's kind of a media mixing even in my own public interactions. So I don't know, that's a great question. Additional challenges in sharing those stories, kind of keeping, I think when we do have our moment of return, whatever that's going to look like, I think that our lives will have already fragmented in some ways, right? We will already have gotten used to new modes of communication. So I think this is a great, maybe Mariam can actually speak to this, right? When you actually it sort of is my question also about what's AlHamra civilization going to look like post-pandemic, right? How is the exhibition of that civilization going to look? I kind of feel like we have to foresee also undoing or a rethinking of our means of interaction amongst human beings in the future that allow for more flexible forms of sociability.
Yeah, it's been tough. Like we started sort of our collaboration with the human side of Earth, just 3 years ago, I think, or 2 years ago. And we were hoping that by this time we would have people come and visit us at the museum, in our own sort of space. I think what we are looking into now is how to safely welcome everyone in. We've been kind of lucky to not have the pandemic affect us based on how secluded we are, but it's still something that we have to think about, especially now that, you guys have changed how you sort of how you navigate places and how you sort of move within places. So social distancing is something that we never thought we would think about. Also, the touching of different objects is something that we need to actually consider again, because um, um, some of the artifacts that we have actually are tactile and you need to touch and feel. So it's an interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what the museum is going to be like once we.
Thank you, Mariam. And with that, thank you so much, everyone, for your presence, for your thoughts and your questions and the conversation. I also want to quickly mention that Khalid Mizena, who's part of this call, is an artist and illustrator who's accompanying us throughout our series of conversations, navigating digital identities, and he's creating live illustrations of these conversations to create a visual archive of all of the different interactions that we're going to have. So you might see a sketch tomorrow on our newsletter. If you're not subscribed to that, make sure you do on our website. And otherwise, our next conversation I can't say what it will be about, but I can say that it will be on May 31st. So just stay tuned, watch out on our social media and our newsletter to stay up to date. And again, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good rest of your evening, of your night, day, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.